Fly fishing in lakes requires us to be able to cover a wide variety of fishing depths because the fish are going to be feeding in shallow water, slightly deeper water, and then the deeper portions of the lake at various times of the year. So that means we need different fly lines, starting with a full floating line and then a series of different densities of sinking lines to cover off all those different zones. So when we talk about different zones in the lake of where fish are feeding, there's some basic terminology that we want to understand. From the edge of the lake going out over the shallow water, that's called the shoal or littoral zone. That zone extends to about 15 to 20 feet. And then once we get to about the 20-foot depth level, typically lakes will have a drop-off where there'll be a definite slope down into deeper water. And that slope goes down into what we call the deep water zone. So the three areas of the lake that we focus on are the shoal, the drop-off, and then the deep water zone of the lake. So on the shoal water, basically water 15 to 20 feet or less, we'll be using floating lines with indicators so that we can spend patterns below the indicator. We're going to use floating lines with a long tapered leader and sinking flies, no indicator. And then we're going to use intermediate, which are usually sink at about 1.25 to 1.75 inches per second. And they're often clear colored or camo colored in coloration. We're going to use type 3 sinking lines, which means the line sinks at 3 inches per second. And we could also use a type 4 or 5 full sinking line, which sinks even faster. And those sinking lines, we're going to be fishing food sources like shrimp, leeches, damselfly nymphs, dragonfly nymphs, water boatmen, back swimmers, blobs, and boobies. And on the floating lines, we're going to be fishing chironomids, chironomid larvae, chironomid pupa, mayflies, damselflies, caddis pupa, dragonfly, even damselfly nymphs, things like that. So those lines, the floating line and those sinking lines, cover off the shoal. Once we get into the drop-off where the water's dropping off from, say, 20 feet down to 30 feet, that slope, the face of that steep drop-off, that's when we're going to use a lot of our faster sinking lines, type 5, type 6, type 7, which again, it's 5 inches per second, 7 inches per second. So the line's going to get you down so that we can cast out over the edge of the drop-off and strip in leeches, dragonfly nymphs, boobies, or we could hang blobs off that, or off those sinking lines, or we can retrieve blobs up through the deep water zone on the edge of the drop-off as well. And on the drop-off, we can fish effectively also with floating lines and indicators with long leaders, or floating lines and a sinking leader, again with a long leader. And then once we get into the deep water zone, which could be anywhere from 35 feet to 60, 70 feet, depending on the lake, we're talking about type 6, type 7 full sinking lines. And this is a situation where we could be fishing deep water chironomid hatches vertically. We call it dangling. We're fishing straight up and down. And then we're going to be casting with dragonfly nymphs, leeches in the summertime, boobies stripped through the water column anywhere from the bottom up in those deeper zones, and then suspending blobs under type 6 or type 7 full sinking lines, or casting retrieving blobs on type 4, 5, 6 full sinking lines up through the water column. So you can see there's 3 distinct habitat zones we're going to be fishing in lakes, and we need those different fly lines to cover all those zones. So you might ask, if you're a beginner, well, that's a lot of fly lines to have. You can get away with basically 3 to start off with. A full floating line, which we can use with indicator or not an indicator, and then a type 1-3, which is a dual density sinking line to cover off the shoal fishing. And then I would suggest at least a type 5 or a type 7 for the deeper water edges of the drop-off and the deep water zone. Those 3 fly lines would help you get started and cover off any fishing situation that you might find in lakes, whether it's spring, summer, or fall.